let's see here. Who's in 5th grade? If you raise your hand in 5th grade. All right, the 2 girls. You 2 girls come on up. Perfect, that worked out great. I may have signed the hand over here, but I'll just grab these 2 girls that are close by. I have something back here that I need your help, and so if you guys could do that for me, that would be great. So if you guys could just pick it up on either side. Just right now. There you go. Awesome. All right, good job, girls. That's it. You may go be seated. See, that's all you needed. Very simple. All right. For the next 3 weeks, we're going to be talking about the birth of Christ as found in the book of Matthew. The title of the series is called We Three Kings. Now, I know that you're thinking about the song, We Three Kings of Orient are. Well, the reality is, and many of you probably know this already, they probably were not kings, and there probably wasn't 3. But we are going to be talking about 3 kings that every one of us, deal in our life every single day. So basically the question I have, and this is why we have this out here, is who has the right to sit in this chair? Who has the right to be in that chair? Is it the kings of the world, governments and so forth? Or maybe it's you. Maybe you have the right to sit in that throne. Or is it Christ? This series is going to explore and answer what happens when each of these kings sits on that throne. So Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 23 is our scripture that we're going to use today. So if you can turn there now, please. We are going to spend the majority of our time in that book and in that chapter. I'm going to go ahead and start reading. Chapter 2, verses 1 through 23. I'm not going to read the whole part. I'm just going to read it as we go through, but I'm going to start from the very beginning. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born of King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. So they said to him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for this is written by the prophet. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search carefully for the young child. And when you have found him, bring back word to me, that I may come and worship him also. And when they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary, his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Then being directly warned in a dream they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way. So here's the problem that we're facing in this whole passage here and in our life and in general. We may desire for the right king to be at the center of our life, but too many times we fail to recognize what he looks like and how to know if the right king's in that place. You know, it's really easy to go back to our old life before we came to know Jesus and to live according to our flesh. For the next 3 weeks, we're going to be talking about this. We're going to be using scriptures from Matthew, from 1 Samuel, and also from Ezekiel. You know, it was a question even Israel struggled with. For all of their year, for over 1,000 years, they dealt with this issue of who was the rightful king in their kingdom. And even during the time of Christ, and we're going to be exploring this, even Christ in his life, on a number of occasions, the people tried to make him a king. And his words were, "It is not my time yet." We're going to be talking about that, especially on week 3. So the question is we need to make sure that we have the rightful king in our place. So let's set the foundation. Let me just kind of share with you a little bit in my own life how this works in my own life. So just imagine yourself, you have a table with all these people who have influence in your life. Some of them by choice, and some of them are not. Like, for instance, I have a mom and dad, and therefore they were sitting at that table. However, as life goes through, we have to find out who is going to really sit at that table. Because there's going to be some people in our life that we may not want in that table. For instance, I have two dads at my table. My first dad, my biological father, he raised me until I went off to college. He taught me how to work hard. He taught me how to use the talents that God had given me. He taught me to build homes. He taught me a lot. But my dad was an alcoholic. And so he did not teach me how to be a good family man, how to be a good husband, how to be a good dad. It was my second dad. And so oftentimes I'll talk about my mom and dad. When I say that, I talk about my stepdad. He's now been my stepdad for almost 34 years now. And he's the dad that I refer to as my spiritual dad, as my dad that has influence in my life. So he sits at this table as well. Now, you may choose to put a coach in there, maybe a grandma that you're really close to, maybe a teacher from when you're a child. But if you determine who sits at that table that has influence in your life, only you can add or remove them. Like for me, like I said, I have two dads. I've chosen to have my first dad because he taught me hard work. I chose my second dad because that's the dad I talked to when I needed wisdom and advice. In fact, I just talked to him just this last week for that very issue. But these people, these influencers, dictate how you live your life. So I do a lot of counseling as a pastor. And what I've discovered so many times is that people who have a lot of struggles is because they have the wrong people around their table. In my own life, with my dad, I never became an alcoholic. I struggled with alcohol when I was a teenager. But I never became an alcoholic except in one area: my behavior. And I did not know that. I didn't drink to excess. I didn't get involved in drugs and other stuff. But my behavior was alcoholic. And I didn't discover this until our 7th year of marriage, where it became very difficult for my wife to deal with me. Because even though I didn't hurt her, I didn't do anything, I treated her like my dad had treated my mom and us. And it took a lot of counseling for me to realize that I could no longer have him as that man at the table. And that's when Lee, my stepdad, took his place in that part of my life. Because Lee, my stepdad, he loves my mom and he loves us kids. And he showed me how to be a husband and a father. And so the same is true for us. There are many times that people have the wrong people at their table. And so the same is true in this chair. Sometimes we have the wrong person sitting in that chair. And so this message is going to be talking about who is the right person. Who should that person be? So let's get into Matthew chapter 2. But before we get started, I need to explain a little bit about Matthew chapter 2. And today we're going to focus mostly on this passage, although we will cover it a little bit in each week. But I want to talk about basically the whole goal and why I chose Matthew. Because Luke has a much more thorough story of Jesus. And most of the time when you hear the story of Jesus being born, it comes out of Luke. But the reason Matthew is, every one of these books has a different perspective. So Matthew, he was a fellow Jew. He was a tax collector, if you guys remember. And so he was writing to the Jews, and his purpose for writing was to demonstrate that Christ is the king. Now Mark, he was a young man at the time that Jesus was alive. So he was a protege of Peter. And his gospel was written to the Romans, and he wanted to show that Jesus was a servant. That was really important in the Roman Empire, where about 40% of the population were probably slaves and servants. Luke, he wrote to the Gentiles. He was a Gentile himself, and he wanted to express how Christ was the man. He was a man, the Son of God. He uses that phrase many more times than anybody else. And then John, he had been in the church for a long time. He was very revered, one of the great leaders, and he wrote to the church, and he wanted to demonstrate that Christ is God. Now, there's a lot more to it, but the reason why I wanted to share this with you is because I want you to see that Matthew does have a distinctive purpose and to demonstrate that Jesus is the King. But what are the roles and duties of a king? So that we know that we're putting the right person in that chair. You know, it seems like our life is full of decisions, isn't it? Even up here in our small little town, it seems like we have decisions after decisions after decisions that we have to make. And it seems like, man, can I just give that decision to somebody else to do? It'd be just nicer if just someone else would run my life and I just have breakfast, lunch, and dinner and go do my job, whatever, but someone else makes all the decisions in my life. You know, what car I'm going to buy, or what insurance I'm going to use, or, you know, all those big decisions. It'd be just easier to have someone else do it. But the question is, why do people clamor for a king? We're going to be addressing that next week when we talk about 1 Samuel and why people do that. But we know it's true in our life. We know that we want people to help us out. We know that we need a king, a leader. And we know that we need someone in the throne of our hearts who's going to guide our way. So let's go to Matthew chapter 2. And let's read through. We'll start with verse 1. It says, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came from Jerusalem." Now what's interesting is that to learn a bit more about Herod, Herod was in fact a Jew. And in fact was called a king. But the reality was, he was only a king in name only. He acted more like a governor. Because at that time, as you know, Israel was ruled by Rome. And so, I think the Roman government just said, you know what, you can call yourself whatever you want. If you want to be king of the Jews, it doesn't matter to us. You're one of our vassals. You're one of our governors. You'll rule like we tell you to. And so, he was just this, just a king. And not necessarily a true king in the nature of what we see as kings, but rather a governor. What's interesting is that this all came about because another king, another ruler, started this. Remember, this whole story started because there was a census to be taken. And so a ruler, a king, was actually started this whole thing that ushered in the King of Kings. Now, let's go to this next part. It says, where is he who was born King of the Jews? Now, this statement was made by the Magi. Now again, probably astrologers, astronomers, sorcerers, that type of person was who these were. And they came because they saw this star, because they were, looking up at the skies, and they followed it, so they just assumed the star was ushering in a king. So they weren't saying that Jesus was the king. They came looking for the king of the Jews. Now what's interesting about this statement is it's not a statement of appointment by God, but rather a statement made by men. Because the only time that Jesus is ever called the King of the Jews is by Gentiles. No Jew ever called him King of the Jews. None of the disciples ever called him the King of the Jews. Twice he was called the King of the Jews. Once by the Magi, and once by Pilate. And then that title was put above his cross. Because their idea was he's just King of the Jews, this small, insignificant people. And that's who he was. And so these guys came, not because they're saying that this is the true king of all time, but rather he's just another king that we want to come and worship and honor. But what's interesting is what happens later. It says, so he says, "For when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him." Why was he troubled? Well, Herod had worked really hard to get to that position. You know how sometimes people are, they get to a position and they're afraid of losing it. They don't want anybody to take over for them and take their role. This was Herod. He had worked hard to become the king. And there had been a number of people who had been trying to take him off his throne. So all of a sudden he hears this again. He's like, oh no, not another one. But come on, let's really think about this logically. These guys come and they say they're looking for a king, and he's going to be born. Now Herod at this point in his life is towards the end of his life. He's a pretty old man by now. Now really, a baby, you're afraid of a baby taking your position? I mean, what's the soonest that this baby could take your position? 6 years old like Josiah? Or 8, I think 8 years old when he was, or maybe 16, like one of the other kings. I mean, that's like 8 years down the road, 16 years down the road. But the reality is, it would have to take the approval of Rome. He would be in his 20s or 30s. By then, Herod's going to be a dead man. Why is he so concerned about this? It's so irrational for him to be this way. but he's troubled nonetheless. And then it says, of all things, Jerusalem was troubled by this as well. Like, why was Jerusalem troubled by this? I really struggled with that for a while. And then I realized they're troubled because, oh great, here we go again. He's going to be worrying about somebody else, and he's going to go off and do some weird stuff. Let me put it in this perspective. I served on a church, and the senior pastor was a huge football fan of a particular team I won't mention. It's none of your teams, just so you know. Okay. None of the teams that you guys love. And so he is this big fan of this team. And you know, they weren't always so successful every year. They struggled with quarterbacks, they struggled with coaches, you know, the typical stuff. We knew as a staff never, ever to talk to him about it on Monday or Tuesday during staff meeting if his team played particularly bad. Because it was something he just didn't want to raise that up. Because he obviously was very passionate about it, and sometimes he got a little over-passionate about it. That's the same sort of thing with Herod and with Jerusalem. It's like they're thinking, oh no, Herod's going to go off on a tangent again. He's going to get all upset because somebody else is going to try to take his throne. And so that's why they were troubled. And sometimes it happens in our own life as well. That we're troubled by things that just don't make sense. And then we have the priests. Then we have the priests. Where the Christ was to be born, the priests knew the answer. I'm puzzled again. Why did the priests go? Why did the scribes go? Bethlehem's only 6 miles away. It's like a 2 or 3 hour walk. Why didn't they go with these guys to seek the Christ themselves? That was really puzzling to me. You would think if you're going to have... Now remember, they have been waiting for a true king for a long, long time. Hundreds of years. And then all of a sudden they hear that there's a king that's going to be born. And in the place where the scriptures tell them he's going to be born, and they don't go? Something's not right with this picture. They're not seeing the rightful king. Because they're more concerned about themselves again. They didn't travel because they didn't believe in him. And so these scribes who should have been the ones, the priests that should have been the ones to know, they should have traveled with him and honored this king. But instead, Herod sends them to Bethlehem. Now, he didn't believe. He just wanted confirmation of the birth. And you'll see why here in just a few minutes, why he wanted that confirmation. You know, not everyone is aware that Christ is the King of the Kings. In our nation, the gospel has been preached to millions and millions of people. We see it on TV, we see it in print, we see it on the internet, we see it everywhere. And yet there are so many that do not believe in him. So to say that these people didn't believe in him either should not be a stretch of the imagination. Even Peter didn't know who he was. Jesus asked him one day, hey, who do the people say I am? And they said, oh, they think you're Elijah or the prophet. And then Peter says to Jesus, you are Christ, Son of the living God. And Jesus says something interesting to him. He says, you did not come to this by your own knowledge, but by being revealed by the Holy Spirit. There are a lot of people who may hear about Christ, but they're never going to know that he's the King of the Kings. And they're never going to know that he belongs in the chair in their life, that he should have the place at the head of their table. Because they do not know him and believe him the way that we do. And the scribes did not either. This also shows another thing about Herod, about having this kind of king in your life, is that he was devious. He didn't care truly what was about this king. He cared only about himself. He was only worried about his own position and his power. He didn't care that this might be the king that would bring salvation to all. In their mind, their idea of a king was that he was going to get rid of Rome and be the king over them, and that his kingdom would last forever. That's the king that they were looking for. And so now there's these people come and saying, well, I'm looking for the king of the Jews, and he doesn't respond. He should be thinking, man, we can finally throw Rome off of our shoulders and we can go into our own thing. But he doesn't do that because he's only concerned about himself. He doesn't care about the people at all. He cares only about his position and his power. Now, the gifts that were given, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, were very, very expensive gifts. And I'm sure you've heard messages and things about why they were so forth and why it was given gold and frankincense and myrrh. And those are great messages. I'm not going to focus on that except for the fact that they were symbols of wealth. But they also serve a very practical purpose as well. And think about this and how God does this in our own life. In just a few weeks, Joseph is going to have a dream. And that dream is going to tell him, you need to leave. You need to get out of this place because this king is coming after you. And so he flees to Egypt, and he's there for a couple of years before he returns. How did they make it those couple of years? Oh yeah, gold, frankincense, myrrh. That helped them to live for a couple of years while they were out of their land until they could return back to Nazareth. Now, of course, it doesn't reveal how many. It just gives us the 3 gifts that were given. But the purpose is it showed that it is a gift worthy of a king. But then there's also a practical side is that Jesus and his family had a way to make ends meet. Now, so Herod realizes after a short time that these guys have betrayed him. They did not come back and tell him that the child was born and where exactly he was. He was exceedingly angry. Let's read that in verses 13 through 16. Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise, take the young child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I bring you word. For Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed for Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt I called my son. Then Herod, when he saw that he was deceived by the wise men, was exceedingly angry. And he sent forth and put to death all the male children who were in Bethlehem and in all his districts, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the wise men. This is a very hard passage to know that innocent little kids were killed in order for a person, a man, to keep his position and power. It goes to the depths of who he was as a person and what this world is about. This world doesn't mind killing its babies if it helps them to live a better life. It helps them to keep their power. It helps them to keep their position. And Herod was no different. His power and position were more important than the lives of these little babies. He put to death probably 20 to 30 little babies that did not deserve death. But because Herod wanted to retain his power, he did that. He was a cruel man. And this is just one of many things that he did in his lifetime to demonstrate what a cruel person he was. There's a famous quote by Lord Acton that says, "Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely." And that was Herod. You see, Israel wanted a king so they could go to war and give them justice. But once you give this power away, it will be abused. The king becomes an absolute master of all. And that's exactly what Herod did. So the question is, do you really want the world to be sitting on your throne, to have its influences? I did for a time. I allowed my dad to sit on that throne. And guy who I became as a person. It nearly destroyed my marriage. It nearly destroyed my family because of that. So we have to ask ourselves that question all the time. So what does this mean for us? The way the world focuses upon the position and power and not people. When people are concerned about the position and power, you know they don't care about his people. Governments or others do not belong on the throne of our hearts. It is not our Savior. And I'll give you a great example of even with the best of intentions, how it still does not work well. A number of years ago, I worked for the headquarters for a large denomination in Springfield, Missouri. I got to work with some great people, all people, dedicated Christians, that loved God and wanted to do their best for the Lord. There was about 1,800 employees. Does that sound right, Angel? About 1,800 employees in this building. And they had a printing press, very large, one of the largest printing presses in the country. Just very big organization. And I was tasked to writing a bunch of curriculum and then taking it over to the editing department. I worked with the editing department and finally get it published and printed. But I discovered this one thing, even though these people and some of them I knew personally that went to our church that were good people, I discovered that that organization itself was like an organism. That it had a mind of its own. That there were some frustrations beyond all belief. Things couldn't get done in a timely manner. Sometimes things were said and done that just were totally inappropriate. Because I realized it was an organism rather than people. And so even when we have something like that, where it seems like everyone's got good intentions, they still should not be on your throne. They still should not have influence over your life. So in closing, what does it mean to live this out? So ask this question of yourself. Who's sitting around your table? Who has influence in your life? Then the big one. Who's at the head of your table? Who's sitting on the throne? This is how you know if whoever's on that throne has the right focus. If they're more concerned about their position, that's not the right person on that throne. If they're more concerned about their power, that's not the right person on the throne. If they're concerned about people, that's the right person to be on the throne. And that's Christ. Let's stand as we sing hymn 229.